Accountability is a huge issue in our society now, and today we're talking about how to teach kids accountability right from the beginning.
Today we're going to give you some kind of philosophical ideas to help teach that accountability, but then we're going to finish up with some more practical things, so stick around.
Okay, let's jump right in.
Okay.
Because the most powerful parenting tool that you have is you.
Yeah.
Because kids are always watching. In fact, this gets in our way sometimes.
It does. You know, just a quick little, I remember one time when my 2 or 3-year-old went and hid in the other room, and I said, "What are you doing? Why are you hiding?" He goes, "I just don't want to be an example right now for my little brother." And it's kind of like that as a parent. We are always being watched. So the best thing that we can do is to model the behavior and the mindset right from the start of
accountability. So what does that even mean? I think as we look at the definition of accountability, it's the opposite of blame.
Right.
Can we start with that? In a blaming mindset, we're always looking for that thing or that person that we can blame for whatever's going on.
Right.
Who's to blame, right? You hear this in the media all the time too. Now, accountability is not blaming ourselves. I think that's still kind of a victim sort of a way of thinking. But it is taking responsibility. I remember years ago I was driving to see a client in southern Utah, and as I'm cruising down the road, have you done this before? You get lost in your thoughts and you go right past your exit. Just blow right on by, right? And I knew I was in the wrong place when I looked up and I saw this big colorful sign that said, "Arizona welcomes you." Arizona, this isn't even the right state, right? Now, accountability in that setting is look down and see whose hands are on the steering wheel. And I realized, I'm here because I drove here. Now, I'm not blaming myself.
No, it's taking ownership.
Right. And the bad news is also the good news, because if my hands are on the wheel, what can I do now? See, now I have the power to take it somewhere. And this is what we want to teach our children. If they're blaming or avoiding responsibility, if they're not taking accountability, they also don't have the power to move this thing forward the way that they could otherwise.
And I think that's where modeling in your own behavior and language comes in such a big play. Because if I say, "Oh, you make me so mad," where's the ownership, right? I've suddenly put all of the blame, all of the responsibility, all the ownership for my feelings on you. And so, you know, who isn't guilty of having said that, even to a child?
Right.
You know, you make me crazy, you make me, you know, we've said it before. But let's start becoming more aware of that and take ownership in our language, in our behavior, because we're showing our child, like, wow, I am starting to feel so frustrated. Okay, I mean, let's be real.
Own it.
We are.
Own
it. Be real, and you're modeling that, and you're going to work through it, and you're still owning it. And so you're teaching your child right from the start, they get to be accountable.
And did you know that parents can take a time out?
You bet.
In fact, that's a good time to do it. The example that you shared, Vicki, and we've done this in raising our kids, where you get a little steamed,
so
and it's...
I'm just going to walk away for a minute.
And own your feelings. It's okay to say, look, I'm feeling a little tipped over right now. I'm going to take a moment. And then I'll come back and we'll continue this conversation. So that's more of the accountability approach. We talked a little bit about blame, but another word is fault.
Whose fault is this?
Or it's my fault.
My fault. It's your fault.
Fault. We live on a fault. Here in the state of Utah, where Vicki and I live, we live on a geological fault line. That's where two tectonic plates come together, and if they shift, you have what's called an earthquake. All right? So I think of fault, and I think of, what's going to get shaken up here? But it also means imperfection. Okay, so if there's a fault in something, then there's an imperfection or a flaw, right?
Yeah.
We are not flawed. Okay, we're imperfect. But I tell my clients all the time, we're perfectly designed to be imperfect.
You're right. Mm-hmm.
It's how people are, and I don't know any people who aren't imperfect. So the word fault gets in our way. It has multiple meanings. What if we were to shift that? Instead of it's my fault, that's my responsibility.
Mm.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Does that feel a little different? Our vocabulary matters. So let's get away from blame and fault. Let's go to things more like ownership, accountability, responsibility, and use that in our own language.
One of my favorite Disney shows is Meet the Robinsons.
I love that one.
And I think one of the reasons I love it is because they have created a family culture where you celebrate mistakes and what you can learn from it. And then it's a whole process. And I think that's something we can do as parents, is to develop this culture. Mistakes are okay. Matter of fact, in my school a couple of years ago, I think it comes originally from Walt Disney, but our principal had put up on the walls, fail. It stands for first attempt in learning. Fail. And it just makes you feel not quite so bad about things not going the way you thought they would go, because you're going to learn something from it.
Right. This culture that you're talking about, what we're really trying to do here is establish an environment where it's okay to take accountability.
Well, not only okay, but it's really the only way, because if you could do everything perfectly from the beginning, then who's growing, who's learning, who's changing? And so if we are not allowing our children to fail, we're also really not allowing them to strive.
Or to succeed, for that matter. The failure becomes part of a process of learning.
Yeah, it's not the outcome. And maybe that's part of the culture we're trying to establish, is that there's always more growing to happen. It's not an out. That whatever didn't work out is not the final piece of the story. That's all that failure is, just in the process.
One of the things that you can do to establish this culture, obviously the language that you use, your own modeling of it, all of that is important. It's also okay to talk about this.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's a mortician, an undertaker is what he calls it. And he says, talking about death won't kill you. Which is kind of funny, because he does pre-planned funeral arrangements for people, and they have to actually talk about it. Well, the point I'm trying to make is, you can talk about these things with your kids. This is not a secret. It's not something that you have to know as a parent, and then you have to somehow magically find a way to instill it into your children. Talk to them about it. Even when they're little, you can start using language and vocabulary that helps them to understand the principles of accountability, responsibility, moving from blame to ownership. Talk to them about it. You'll be surprised at what they can pick up on. Hey, we've got 2 more points for you, but before we get to those, would you go down and click that subscribe button? That way you can get new parenting resources brought to you, especially if you take a minute to click on that notification bell. So we promised, Vicki, that we'd get more practical here at the end. And there's a 4-part process that we talk to a lot of our parents about when we're doing our coaching programs that starts with, give your kids a task that they can handle. Now, how can you tell if your kids can handle it?
Don't ask them.
Don't trust their opinion on this, because they may try to mislead you. Oh, I can't, it's too hard, whatever. Now, if they've done it before, that's a dead giveaway. But we also encourage you to use the 5K test, which is, if I were to offer my kid $5,000 to do what I just asked him to do. Now, $5,000 in the equivalent of your child's currency.
Yeah, whatever that really means to them.
Whatever that is.
50 pounds.
If we take motivation out of the picture, are they capable of doing this thing? And we have to give our kids responsibilities, or they will not learn their accountability. They have to have the responsibilities. So without sheltering them from it or withholding it because we're afraid they won't do it right, give them a task they can handle. The next step is, you're going to hope. Now that you've given them the task, you're going to hope that they
fail.
Blow it.
See, that part always surprised me. Wait, what?
I originally got this from Jim Fay and Foster Klein, the Love and Logic founders. And it's brilliant because this is the way you detach from the outcomes as a parent. Hey, succeed or fail. Either way's fine with me because you're going to learn something either way. And going back to the movie that you mentioned,
right.
There's a scene in the movie where one of the characters says, you can learn a lot from your mistakes. Successes?
Not so much.
Not so much. And it's true. So don't be so attached to the outcome that your kids have to succeed. Failure is probably going to be a more valuable experience anyway. So you detach from the outcome. You hope that they blow it because then they're going to learn something.
Right. And then you don't leave it there.
Right.
Okay. So they've blown it. You've talked about it. What are you going to do next? How are you going to handle this? Again, the accountability is on them, right? Responsibility is theirs. And then you give them the same or a very similar task that you know they can handle. And this time you hope for their success because they're going to have learned something in that process.
And if they fail again, that's okay too.
That's okay
so
too.
stay detached from the outcome. Yeah. One important part that we haven't mentioned yet is the consequences. Every choice has a consequence. Right. The better my choices, the better my consequences. And so when your child succeeds or when your child blows it, either way, they get the appropriate consequence for their success or failure. And you don't bail them out. There's the old 3 R's of parenting. Do you remember those, Vicki?
Rant,
rave, and rescue.
Rave, that's it. Rant, rave, and rescue.
Where you bawl them out and bail them out. We're not going to go there. They get to have their consequence because they earned it. You wouldn't take away your child's trophy if they won a competition. Do not take away the consequences for their failures because that robs them of a learning experience that they really need to have in order to learn accountability. That is really important. Hopefully you got some useful tips and ideas here. There's more. In fact, cue up that next video. Watch it next. It's 5 things that every new parent needs to know. These are things that you're going to want to know. So watch that one next.